Okay, we are live. I am closing the window to avoid feedback. And I would like to welcome everyone to Nerd Church. And I am going back to my former policy of doing modern Catholicism, like sort of the news that you need to know on Thursdays, talking about, ongoing controversies on Thursdays, and I'm going to review just church history, things that you need to know about modern Catholic practice, and kind of, where the ideas are in the Catholic Church and where they come from, and all that kind of thing. Because after that stream on Tuesday, I was just not in a good place mentally because I don't like being angry all the time. But you know what? Sometimes people say things and do things that cause damage, and that needs to be talked about. And Thursday is the day that I'm going to be doing that. Oh, it looks like somebody's watching already. Hi! I as an 88 subscriber YouTube channel, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's get us to 100 by the end of the year. I always get overly excited whenever anyone bothers to tune in for any reason. So hello, person. Anyway, so today we have we have an exciting show for you. It's actually going to be happening in two parts. In the first part, I'm going to be talking about the ongoing controversy with the SSPX consecrations, because a few days ago, Pope Leo actually made a formal public statement about, well, not a formal public statement, but he spoke to a reporter about it. And then in basically the last hour of the show, Jordan from Reason to Doubt is going to be joining me so that he can tell us a little bit more about why we can be really, really sure that the Shroud of Turin is a piece of 14th century art. And I will be here to tell you why that's totally okay. But so without further ado, I am going to get into the current statement by the SSPX, and then I'm going to show you at least part of the traditional Catholic response to that. I'm going to be focusing on Anthony Stein, but I'm also going to, next week when Jordan isn't here, I'm just going to give you kind of a sampling of some of the other traditional Catholic reactions. I'm starting with Anthony Stein just because he is one of the trads that I don't mind engaging with as much, because he usually tries to represent the other side honestly. And when he's not, it's really obvious that he's not. So also, he's a very good news aggregator, so his reports tend to be give you a fairly good representation of what is going on with the trads. But first, we're just going to watch this 2-minute clip of the Pope talking about the SSPX consecrations.
While departing Castel.
Okay.
And also on Tuesday, Pope Leo XIV answered questions from the press as usual. Outside his residence. One topic addressed was the SSPX controversy. The fraternity will carry out a Episcopal ordinations on July 1st in Switzerland. If they proceed without the necessary papal mandate, which the Pope has not granted, they will incur schism and excommunication. Pope Leo commented.
Sto considerando ancora fare un altro appello a dire non fate questo, cerchiamo di vivere la comunione nella Chiesa, ma è la loro scelta, bisogna rendersi conto di ciò che significa per loro e per la Chiesa. Certamente la divisione fra i cristiani è sempre un punto doloroso, però loro rifiutano di accettare certi elementi fondamentali della Chiesa, cominciando con diversi punti del Concilio Vaticano II. E questo, se fanno quella scelta, mi dispiace, però noi dobbiamo andare avanti.
The Pope also spoke about his visit to Spain, where he expressed his happiness at having shared in the joy of the faith with those in Madrid, Barcelona, and the Canary Islands. As for upcoming trips, this is what Pope Leo said.
Francia, e poi stiamo vedendo
Perù pronto?
possibile.
As usual, he was also asked about current world affairs, which prompted the Pope to share his hopes for the latest US-Iran agreement.
Auguro che sia veramente una soluzione alla guerra, che la guerra davvero sia finita e che possiamo andare avanti per il bene di tutti. Eliminare gli armi nucleari, questo sì, cercare il bene di tutti i popoli, cercare come risolvere i problemi anche a livello economico e sociale che sono stati creati in questo tempo.
In July, Pope Leo will move to the newly renovated papal residence at Castel Gandolfo for the
Okay. So that's what the Pope said. So that's kind of where we are right now, is Pope Leo is saying, don't do it. But he's also making it very, very clear that this is the action of the SSPX, and that the SSPX needs to be willing to come to the table and talk about what their issues are. And they are not willing to do that. And as a result, guess what? They will be excommunicated. He's talking about this as a upcoming painful division. However, and that seemed pretty clear to me. However, one of the things that a lot of online traditional Catholics like to do is pretend that what seems pretty clear is not, in fact, clear. So now we will turn, if I can go out of, okay, that's how we can go out of full screen. And now we are going to see what Mr. Anthony Stein had to say. Oh, excuse me, I was watching this earlier, so I need to run it back. Oh, okay.
Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations.
Pope Leo finally spoke publicly about the SSPX situation. We'll go to what he has to say almost immediately. What you're going to hear is something many observers, normal Catholics and commentators, have expressed some shock over. That it's a tacit admission from the Pope. The Vatican II ushered in a new religion, and his litmus test is acceptance of the statements of Vatican II that the SSPX hold as contentious. We'll go over what those actually are.
Okay, now I want you to see this, right? The Pope said they have to accept Vatican II, and Anthony Stein, who also very much wants to get rid of Vatican II. Now, let's be clear. Anthony Stein does not go to an SSPX chapel. He's part of what's just called traditional Catholicism, the traditional Catholic movement. Traditional Catholicism is a very fractured and disjointed movement that basically wants to return the entire Catholic Church to what things were like pre-Vatican II, and ideally wants to return it to what the Catholic Church was prior to the Second World War, when the Catholic Church had not yet examined and done penance for the role that the Catholic Church as an institution had played in promoting anti-Semitism and promoting the kinds of ideologies of religious violence that led to things like the things that happened in Germany and Poland in the 40s. And, you know, most Catholics feel like the church grows and changes and fixes itself. This is a rejection of that.
What those contentious areas are, because the Pope doesn't say it, which of course lends itself to some ambiguity, as well as some.
Okay. The SSPX just keeps, this is a point that gets brought up by a lot of traditional Catholics on an extremely regular basis. It is the idea that the Pope is ambiguous. The Pope is unclear. The Pope won't tell us what the actual problem is. The thing is that the SSPX has stated some of the things that they don't like about the post-Vatican II situation, mostly relating to the Mass. They have been less forthcoming about, you know, their issues regarding anti-Semitism, their issues regarding the role of lay people, but they have made it clear that they view those things as problems also. So, and part of what Pope Leo and what Cardinal Fernandez were asking for was for the SSPX to come to the table and sit down and have a conversation about Vatican II and its documents. They refused unless they got bishops. When Benedict lifted their excommunication, it was on condition that it was with the understanding that they were going to come and sit at the table and get these alleged ambiguities clarified. They have not done that. This, I am sorry to say, is not a good faith argument. This is deliberately obfuscating the point for the sake of carrying water for the SSPX. There is no other way to state that.
Some of the core problems here. It's a shocking statement, though. Shocking that he would go there. Not that he would confirm that they'll be excommunicated. He could have relied on one of the main problems of our time, which is essentially a misreading of Vatican I. He could have relied on what's called papal positivism, which it's just this theory that says whatever the Pope says goes, whatever the Pope says is law, whatever the Pope says is capital T tradition.
That's not what papal positivism is. Papal positivism is saying that the Pope is the Pope, and that ultimately the definitive word on who gets to interpret doctrine, who gets to explain what tradition is, who gets to teach, rests in the hands of the Pope and the people who he has delegated authority to. That's what papal positivism is. And that is, for a lot of people, that's a big part of being Catholic, is knowing that there is a person who is making those calls and being willing to submit your intellect and will to the Pope. And when you reach a point that you can't, your options are to either shut your mouth and work for change and come up with better and more Catholic arguments for your position, or you leave the church. That's what happens. That's what needs to happen. That's what's always happened. Anthony Stein doesn't like that.
There's a very major problem in our time because it turns the Pope essentially into God. It turns the Pope into not the guarantor of tradition, but a divine oracle. It's one of the more permanent.
That is literally a Protestant criticism of the Pope. That is a Protestant criticism of papal authority. That is a Protestant argument. I have heard that argument coming many, many times from Protestants. You worship the Pope as God, you accept his authority, you obey him mindlessly. He is making a Protestant argument, not a Catholic one.
Pernicious problems of our times, and it's also a contentious one because the Pope is supposed to defend tradition, not use his binding and loosing authority to make it up as he goes along. We're going to go here first to the actual statement of the Pope. It's video footage that's making the rounds right now. Actually, let's see if I can. We had a very long night here in my neck of the woods. Well, can't download the video, so of course not. So we're going to go here, play it full screen for you.
Well, I played the video for you, so I hope that everyone saw it and enjoyed it.
So that you can see it for yourself. The audio will not be as good as I would like it to be, but don't worry, we'll have the text to also go over it. This is the Pope in his own words, though, shocking as they are.
Okay, I'm just going to skip ahead a little tiny bit because we already saw the Pope.
It's a doctrine of the church that the College of Cardinals, or College of Bishops rather, in union with the Pope as its head, collectively exercises supreme authority over the universal church. The concept of collegiality is rooted in the Apostolic College of the 12 Apostles. It becomes a major point of focus at the Second Vatican Council, specifically in Lumen Gentium, one of the documents that is...
Okay. If you were around for any of the videos when any of my Tuesday videos when I was going over the Marian dogmas, and I'm probably going to make a separate video just on the issue of ecclesiastical councils. But if you recall, all four Marian, well, okay, the first two Marian dogmas were the product of ecclesiastical councils. The second two came after the Pope had sent letters to every single bishop and asked for their opinion and told them to talk to their congregations. The idea that the Pope needs to gather opinions, that the Pope needs to listen to the faithful, that the Pope needs advisors, has always been a core part of the way that Catholic doctrine is formed. This is an illiterate and ahistorical argument.
The most contentious of Vatican II. Lumen Gentium emphasizes shared pastoral responsibility among bishops while always preserving the primacy of the Pope on paper. The concept of collegiality says that bishops govern the church together with and under the Pope, not as isolated individuals. And here's the contention. The SSPX and other traditionalists, including many priests of the FSSP, you're going to hear these statements that if you've ever gotten, especially a younger FSSP priest to speak candidly, they will tell you that they agree with the SSPX on almost all of these things. The contention with collegiality is that...
Yes, it is very true that there are a number of extremely conservative priests in the FSSP. That's the Fraternal Society of St. Peter, which is one of the Latin Mass organizations that exists within the Catholic Church. And yes, sometimes they have sort of retrograde ideas about ecclesiology. However, they are not disloyal and they are willing to stay in and they are willing to work with the Pope. That is the difference. What Anthony Stein is doing here, I believe, is making an appeal to people who are currently attending Latin masses at non-SSPX chapels, trying to get them to go to see him. That's what I sincerely believe is going on here.
According to the SSPX and people who hold to their position, which is a lot more people than you think, that Vatican II's version of collegiality introduces a double subject of supreme power, that it's the Pope and the College of Cardinals or College of Bishops together. And it contradicts Vatican I's definition of papal primacy as personal, full, immediate, and supreme authority belonging to the Pope alone, not with the bishops. From this, you get this kind of...
Okay, so I want you to pay really close attention to what Anthony Stein is going to say here, because he has laid out a model of papal authority where what the Pope says goes regardless. Now, obviously, and this was actually, this was why the old Catholics went into schism back. This is why the old Catholics went into, is my battery not charging? Carlo, help me get this. Okay, we are no longer experiencing technical difficulties. Awesome, go me. Okay, so the point is that Anthony Stein is very much trying to have his cake and eat it too, because part of the reason why the old Catholics schismed was over Vatican I and over the concern that the Pope was going to become a tyrant. The response to that has always been that the Pope will act with infallibility only after he's talked to everyone, and only after he's consulted, only after he's thought, only after he's considered. So again, this is a nonsensical argument. And it's especially a nonsensical argument when you hear what he's going to say next.
Shared form of democratic governance. Sound familiar? We hear a lot of that now from the Synod on Synodality, which weakens the monarchical nature of the papacy. The Pope is supposed to be a monarch. One of our problems today is that people don't even understand what a monarch is. What separates a monarch from a tyrant?
What separates a monarch from a tyrant is that a monarch is interested in the good of the whole group and is working for the good of the whole group and is consulting with the entire group. That's the difference. Leo is acting as a monarch. I should also mention that being willing to hold councils and being willing to consult with other churches and, with not other churches, but with other, with the bishops, with the cardinals, all that, with the laity, all that kind of thing, is something that is very important as they're trying to negotiate with the Eastern churches, with the Orthodox Church, with the Anglican Church. Because one of the bars to getting the band back together has always been the idea that we don't want to submit ourselves to the rule of this one dude who's not going to take our needs into account.
So then we talk about papal positivism. Collegiality overemphasizes the bishop's collective power received at their consecration exercised with the Pope, leading in practice to episcopal conferences that dilute individual bishops' authority and reduce the Pope to a mere head of the college. Before Vatican II, there was no such thing as the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. It didn't exist. That organization, which had a different name,
That is only partially true. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops was initially formed actually in World War I, as both a effort on the part of the U.S. bishops to essentially organize around the war effort, both to provide support for Catholic soldiers who were being sent abroad, making sure that their spiritual needs would be taken care of. And it was also something that became necessary just to keep everybody organized and together. However, there had been several meetings of all of the American bishops got together and held conferences that made decisions that were binding on the entire Catholic Church. Probably in Tuesdays in July, I'm going to take some time to start going over those councils. The First Council of Baltimore is actually super interesting, but the point is that the idea that all of the bishops in a country are going to get together and talk to each other is not a new idea at all. Now, in the days before travel was easy and communication was easy, what very often happened would be there would be one particular see, usually the oldest diocese in that country, that would essentially have pride of place. This was why, for example, the role of Archbishop of Canterbury was always so huge and always so important, because it was something that what I'm trying to say, because the Archbishop of Canterbury was basically the head prelate in England. So the Pope talked to the Archbishop of Canterbury talked to everybody else. Now we have travel is relatively easy, communication is instant and easy. So now, guess what? The USCCB and the German Episcopal Association and the various Episcopal associations in other countries are now organizing together. It's a change in structure brought forth by technology. That's what it is.
It was first founded by Cardinal Bernardin. It happened that was founded in like the late 60s or the early 70s. It did not exist before Vatican II. National bishops' conferences are a post-Vatican II thing. According to the SSPX and other traditionalists, collegiality is a liberal egalitarian innovation, an October Revolution in the Church. October Revolution is what happened in Russia with the Bolsheviks.
Yes, they do enjoy making really weird comparisons to collegiality, because somehow they want to believe that bishops getting together to talk about what's going on in their country and make decisions about how the church is going to proceed on certain issues is the same as guillotining people and violent revolution. It's you're comparing like apples and durian at this point.
This promotes decentralization, the creation of national churches, the American church, again, We used to call it the church in France or the church in America, and really the church in New York, right? That's how we used to talk about things. Now it's the American church, the Canadian church, the European church in the era of the EU. But also it emphasizes the bureaucracy over clear hierarchical personal authority.
What Anthony Stein is talking about is the fact that for a very long time in the Catholic Church, the East Coast had primacy. That that the Archbishop of New York, what he said affected the rest of the country. Now, that's not so much the case. Archbishop Hicks in New York seems to be doing a good job, but part of the reason why he's doing such a good job is because he's respecting the rest of the country. And giving the East Coast primacy is something that is probably not realistic anymore, considering that the two largest dioceses in the country are the Archdiocese of Los Angeles and the Archdiocese of Santa Fe. And I can say that because I'm in the Diocese of Phoenix, which is actually the second largest diocese in the country, except that we aren't an archdiocese. We are a suffragan diocese of the Archdiocese of Santa Fe. And we are very aware that the oldest Christian church in continuous use in the continental United States is in New Mexico. We are not going to give up our pride. We are not going to give up our tradition. We are not going to give up our knowledge of who we are and where we came from to listen to New York. And guess what? Archbishop Hicks isn't asking that, because he wants everyone to have a seat at the table and to listen and have their concerns heard. Everyone.
Rooted in capital T tradition. The quick version is that traditionalists hold that the Pope governs alone as successor of Peter. The bishops assist him individually. When he's called them to collegial action, the supreme power is not vested in this joint college. That's a fiction of history. It remains one of the major traps, basically, that Archbishop Lefebvre called. Well, he had a stronger term for it that I can't really say on YouTube, but it was one of the traps, the ticking one, shall we say, that was set for the church at Vatican II. There was two other ones, but there were three other ones, but two of the more serious ones were religious liberty and ecumenism. Religious liberty as an error.
Now, remember, Anthony Stein said that no one knows, no one has any clue, not even the tiniest hint of knowledge that even the tiniest understanding about which aspects of Vatican II does the SSPX disagree with. How could we know if Pope Leo doesn't say, and then he's just ticking him right off, right? So I would take that as not as a really clear indication that maybe, just maybe, we all know what the problem is.
That is one of the bones of contention, is that man has the right, has the actual right to choose whatever religion he wants. Vatican II basically says that. The church has said that. Popes have said that. Every one of them have said that since Vatican II. Every single one, including whichever one you think is the best one after Vatican II. The church had this doctrine beforehand. You can call it a doctrine. It was
okay. Yes, the Catholic Church has decided that allowing freedom of religion and freedom of conscience is a good thing for everyone. Because when the Catholic Church was not supporting that, that's how we got the 30 Years' War. And that's how you get persecutions. That's how you justify persecutions of Catholics. Because you say, oh, well, when the Catholics are in charge, they start persecuting group, right? The only way to live in the modern world is to allow people to make their own choices about religion. Because otherwise, you get war.
Phrase that described a lot of doctrine, but it is summarized with these words: error has no rights. When the church talked about religious freedom or religious liberty before Vatican II, it was that the church.
Okay, let's play that game. Because if error has no rights, guess what? The Pope just said that the SSPX is an error. Error has no rights. So, at least they could be maybe a little bit internally consistent, just a tiny bit, right? Just like the teeniest, tiniest bit of internal consistency would be lovely.
That true religion, the one true religion, must have the freedom to do its work. It can work with any kind of form of government as long as that government allows the church to do its work. Before Vatican II, the church called on states to essentially be definitionally Catholic. After Vatican II, shockingly, Paul VI got a number of definitionally Catholic governments to abandon their Catholic identity, to become secularized. And what happened in those countries when they did that, belief among the laity crashed.
Yes, it is in fact true that when religious attendance is no longer mandatory in a country, that people who are only engaging in religious activity for the social and political rewards that accrue to people who are doing that are going to just quit. Why bother? Why, if you don't, people who don't believe quit going to church if they're not required to go to church. But sitting there doesn't make them a believer. It makes them a hypocrite. And one thing that the 21st century has shown us is that forcing people into hypocrisy only leads to damage.
It was one of the gravest consequences of Vatican II. Vatican II taught that man has the right to choose his own way. That conflicts directly with error has no rights. Directly connected to that is the error of ecumenism. You've heard me use the term ecumenical dialogue. Before Vatican II, if there was any ecumenical dialogue going on, it was either with the Orthodox to try to heal the East-West schism in a way to show the Eastern Orthodox primates and bishops and lay people that they should be Catholic.
Yes, it's absolutely true that there were efforts made to convince the Eastern Orthodox Church to end the Great Schism. The Great Schism happened almost 1,000 years ago. It still hasn't been healed because it turned out that years of yelling, "You're wrong," except the Filioque. The Filioque, in case you don't know or don't remember, is that in the original Nicene Creed, it was, I believe in the whole, and I'm going to use the English translation, forgive me. It's the only one I have memorized. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father. With the Father and the Son, he is worshipped and glorified. Then in in the West, there were people who were saying that basically you have God the Father, and then the Holy Spirit and the Son are subordinate to God the Father. So that there is a sense in which Jesus and the Holy Spirit are less God than God the Father is, which is incorrect theologically, according to the Catholic view. So they added a clause that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. The Eastern Orthodox had a problem with that because they thought that it was now subordinating the Holy Spirit to the Father and the Son, and essentially just kind of punting on the problem. So that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, and we had a schism. I would also note that that came from the Pope saying, no, I'm the Pope, you do what I'm telling you to do. That's exactly the situation we have here, except instead of a great schism, it's more like a mid-schism, because at most you're just going to get a weird and culty group that's going to hang around and make everyone, including themselves, miserable. But the point is that now, when the Pope and the Patriarch of Constantinople formally lifted the excommunications on each other and have decided that, for example, there are circumstances where a Catholic priest or an Orthodox priest can hear confession or give communion to an Orthodox or Catholic person, depending which way. There's limited intercommunion, there's limited sharing of the sacraments, but we're moving towards dialogue and hopefully reconciliation. And we've talked about a lot of times, because I find it enormously exciting, the efforts that popes have been making to get some of the schismatic churches back into communion with the Catholic Church. That would be a beautiful thing. And it's working. And that's really the reason why the trads don't like it, is because they want there to be a crisis in the church. Because if there is a crisis in the church, they can be the ones who will come in and fix everything. That's what's going on.
To clear up misunderstandings, to teach about the theology and all the rest of it, the things that separate the East from the West. The same was true with any Protestants who were willing to listen. What it was never meant to do was to say, oh, you are a valid way to know Jesus Christ. That was never the way it was supposed to be. You can see it in Leo's treatment of the Anglicans in his documents on the Anglican Church.
Again, the Anglican Church uses a modified version of the Sarum Rite. They have a line of apostolic succession that goes back to bishops who were ordained validly and licitly using the Catholic rite. There is no argument for peace with the SSPX that cannot be made for Sarum Rite Catholics who are now calling themselves the Church of England.
Now, ecumenical dialogue means that that the Catholic Church, this is where the core problem with the ecumenical dialogue that the SSPX and other traditionalists hold, that the Catholic Church, or the Church of Christ rather, subsists in the Catholic Church. Subsists. It comes from, again, Lumen Gentium. You can quote Lumen Gentium here. This is a short quote, so I'm not bringing it up on screen. But this church, the one Church of Christ, says Lumen Gentium, constituted and organized in the world as a society, subsists in. The Latin word is subsisted in the Catholic Church, which is governed by the successor of Peter and by the bishops in communion with him. Although many elements of sanctification and of truth are found outside of its visible structure. That is a statement that would have never appeared in a Catholic document in history before Vatican II.
Yes, But now it is in a Catholic document. It is in a Catholic document that was issued by the Pope in consultation with all the Catholic bishops. And yes, it does represent a change, because instead of saying that the Catholic Church is like a walled garden, and as soon as you leave the walled garden, you are cast out into the outer darkness and can never know peace or love or truth again, it's saying that the body of Christ is a body, and that if you cut off my arm, that's still my arm, and there's still maybe some hope that my arm could be reattached to my body. And that, yes, the Catholic Church in this argument is the one that's getting it the most right. But that doesn't mean that other parts of the body are completely wrong. It's creating a situation where there are degrees of rightness and degrees of wrongness. And it's saying that the Catholic Church is like S tier right? The Catholic Church is like God tier when it comes to being correct. And then you kind of go down, you've got the Anglicans, you got the Lutherans, but it's allowing the possibility that they're not completely wrong. And really, that's just logical common sense. Because if you go to a Lutheran and you say, your religion is completely wrong, and they're like, well, what about the part where we believe in the real presence? And you're like, well, you're only kind of right about that. And they say, oh, you mean the part where we give to the poor? Are we wrong about that? And you're like, well, no, not about that. But so it becomes absurd the minute that religions start or rather, not even religions, but Christian denominations start engaging in good faith dialogue. And then when you start engaging in good faith dialogue with other religions, you find out that there's a whole bunch of just basic pro-social human behavior that we all agree on. And to pretend otherwise, and to pretend that a Muslim man who goes to work, comes home, takes care of his wife, is a good and loving father to his children, is less of a good father than Anthony Stein is because one of them is Muslim and one of them is Catholic, is absurd.
The contention is this: that pre-Vatican II doctrine is expressed in Pius XII's Mystici Corporis and Humani Generis as the more recent documents before Vatican II, but repeated elsewhere many, many, many times throughout history, that the Church of Christ is the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church's full identity is that it's the Church of Christ. Not that it subsists in, not that there are elements of sanctification and of truth outside of its visible structure. Vatican II changed this, using subsists in instead of is. It was seen by the SSPX and traditionalists as introducing a new ecclesiology. Remember, Cardinal Hollerich and Cardinal Mario Bresch, the two heads of the Synod on Synodality, coined the term the new synodal church. They said, along with Cardinal Roche, who was the author of Traditionis Custodes, that the pre-conciliar form of the Mass does not conform to the church's new ecclesiology. They admitted it, ecclesiology being a fancy kind of theological term.
Yes, it's true. The ecclesiology changes. The ecclesiology also changed when the Bishop of Rome stopped being merely the first among equals and became a monarchical figure. It changed again when the Pope decided that he needed to start consulting the world's bishops before making any significant changes. These are things that have changed and rechanged and will continue to change over the centuries. Because the Catholic Church is a living, breathing organism that's made up of over 1 billion people.
For the church's very identity. And what it's, and from that springs its mission in the world, the identity of the church. From that springs its relationship to God and its relationship to mankind and everything else. Everything core about the church comes from its ecclesiology. And the Mass is an expression of the ecclesiology. It's why you can't have the traditional Mass. The SSPX.
And let's be clear. There have been no attempts to attack the traditional Mass as long as that Mass is not being offered by people who are schismatic. And that's just kind of a fact. And it's, you know, they're actually talking about loosening restrictions on who can offer the Mass in Latin. And they're also preparing to be extremely generous and even, and not just the traditional Latin Mass, but also the just offering a normal Mass in Latin, basically treating Latin in the same way that you would treat Spanish or English or French or Vietnamese or any other human language, right? You can just offer the Mass in Latin. And honestly, there's a lot of places where it would be really good and really convenient to offer the Latin Mass, to offer the Mass in Latin, particularly in bilingual parishes like mine. And I hope that that will continue to move forward. But it's not going to move forward as long as people associate being part of a Latin Mass community with being a schismatic.
Have said that yes, the traditional Mass is a major issue, but it's not the only one. It's the theology that leads to the traditional Mass or the new Mass. That is the core of the problem. So I haven't brought up the traditional Mass yet. But the subsistence language leads to a new ecclesiology. It implies the Church of Christ is a broader reality that exists fully in the Catholic Church, but as elements present elsewhere in separated communities. It opens the door to partial.
Again, yeah, it does. You walk up to an Anglican and you say, everything about your religion is wrong. And they're like, you mean that there's a problem with the Trinity? Because guess what? We believe in the Trinity.
Communion with Protestants and Orthodox. Remember Pope Leo standing up and saying, we are already one to various Protestant and yes, pagan leaders. It leads to the concept of sister churches. There's one church. That's the Catholic teaching. One church. This subsistent leads to a visible and invisible or subsisting distinction that weakens the exclusive identity of the one true church with the Catholic Church. It leads the.
And let's be very clear about this. The reason why he thinks that that is a problem, the reason why he does not like that is because he wants to believe that everyone who is not a baptized Catholic that attends a Latin Mass parish is going to burn in hell for all eternity. That you are going to experience, that you and I and everyone except for a few thousand people living in the world right now are going to suffer eternal conscious torment at the hands of an angry God. Pope Leo says that that's not the case. Pope Leo is the one who, according to traditional Catholic belief, has the power to bind and the power to loose because he is standing in direct succession to Peter. And Jesus said what you bind on earth is bound on what you bind on earth is bound on earth, and what you bind in heaven is bound in heaven. What you loose in heaven is loosed in heaven. So either Pope Leo has that power or he doesn't. Either Pope Leo has the ability to say, this is what tradition is, this is what salvation entering the world through the Catholic Church means, or it doesn't.
Idea, as Bishop Barron himself said, that Jesus Christ is the privileged path to salvation. Privileged. He said that to Ben Shapiro on camera. Never backtracked, not to my knowledge anyway. This is, according to the traditional view, a rupture with tradition, promoting ecumenism at the.
Now, this is something that's actually really important, because he kind of name checked Bishop Barron real quick and mentioned an episode that he did with Ben Shapiro. And a lot of people are like, oh, Bishop Barron is an extreme radical traditionalist. He's not. Bishop Barron is as far to the right as you can be without being a schismatic. Bishop Barron is as far to the right as you can be without being against Vatican II and without disregarding the authority of the Pope. So it's always important to remember that when we're talking about people like Bishop Barron, who is very conservative, who is carrying water for the Trump administration, but there's further right out there. And Anthony Stein is kind of like you have Bishop Barron, right? He's on this side of the wall. Then you have Anthony Stein, who's like perched right on top of the wall. Then you have the SSPX, who are like over the wall or about to go over the wall.
Expense of the dogma extra ecclesia nulla salus. This is one of the major contentions that the SSPX explicitly says is their problem with the Second Vatican Council. Now, Leo didn't say what he meant by rejecting core elements of the Vatican II, which are core elements of the church now. So we have to go with what the SSPX has said explicitly. Official post-conciliar clarification.
Yes, Leo assumed that the problems that the SSPX have publicly stated are the problems that the SSPX has, and that everybody knew what he was talking about, and he didn't have to spell it out in little tiny details like he was talking to a toddler. So where's the ambiguity? Where's the confusion? It's nowhere except in the minds of people who want there to be ambiguity and confusion.
Including something from the CDF in 2007, insists it means full identity and continuity. This subsists in language. But critics argue that the ambiguous wording itself is the cause of the problem, and it is. There has not been a clear document from Vatican II, except for like Traditionis Custodes. Everything has been, after Vatican II has been ambiguous. The only time that the ambiguity leaves is to punish traditionalists in some way, meaning people who want the same religion as they had before Vatican II.
So what he's actually saying is that the documents of Vatican II do not favor the kind of traditionalism that he is pushing, and that while the rest of us are still trying to figure out how to be Catholic in the modern world and how to adjust to changes in technology, to changes in the world, rather than retrenching and becoming more and more rigid and more irrelevant to people's lives, and ultimately pointless, because that's what could have happened, right? there have been times where the Catholic Church has been pushing people out with both hands. That was the story of the 1990s and the early 2000s. People were leaving the Catholic Church in droves, and now they're not, and now they're coming back. And that's because the Catholic Church is actually saying things that need to be said in the world, rather than just screaming at people to repent. If you want to go to a church where they just scream at people to repent and scream about sin, there are a lot of mega churches out there. And, that's not the Catholic Church. That's not the church that most Catholics want.
Two, you saw this in the excommunication of Vigano, which we'll get to in a few minutes. You're going to see this with the document that they will use to illicitly and frankly unjustly excommunicate the SSPX. I'll put excommunicate in big quotes here, because what are they being excommunicated from? A new religion. It's Leo's admission, tacitly. I'm not the only one saying that, by the way.
Now, that claim that the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church is in the thing that's in Rome headed by Pope Leo XIV, is no longer really the Catholic Church, is something to pay close attention to, because I firmly believe that that is the pretext that is going to be used to hold some kind of alternative conclave to elect an anti-pope. I hope that I'm wrong about that, because if I'm right about that, we are going to end up with a very public and very ugly split, mainly in the United States and France, because those are the two countries where the SSPX is most important and most present.
The subsist language shifts from the strict identity. The Catholic Church is the Church of Christ, to a looser fullness in, with elements outside. This is seen as a theological root of modern ecumenical confusion, and it is. I'm not the only one saying this. I promise you that. There's a lot of ambiguity that's fueling this madness here. So we'll go to Mr. Matt Gaspers. He posts this to X. He says, to my knowledge, this is the first time the Pope has publicly addressed the upcoming SSPX Episcopal consecration since Father Palmiriani made his announcement over 4 months ago. Here's the question Pope Leo needs to answer from Bishop Schneider. Bishop Schneider, I've been covering what he has had to say about all this numerous times.
Okay. Bishop Athanasius Schneider, once again, is an auxiliary bishop in Kazakhstan, where he teaches patristics at a seminary. He is also one of the few bishops who is speaking out loudly and publicly in favor of the SSPX consecrations. He's not the Pope. He's not going to be the Pope. And that is something that is going to, be an issue for him. I am very afraid, because he wants his vision of the Catholic Church to be the one that wins.
Times, for those who offer the criticism that I never cover the people trying to restore the faith, I have been. Bishop Schneider is one of the very few doing that. And he answered this. He says, why is the unconditional acceptance of the text of Vatican II presented as a conditio sine qua non, meaning the ultimate condition, for full communion with the Holy See, while no comparable requirement exists with respect to the pastoral, disciplinary, or non-definitive teachings of the preceding 20 ecumenical councils?
Oh, I know this one. I know this one. I know this one. I'm going to answer this one. Okay. I very much doubt that Athanasius Schneider is ever going to see this video, but if he does, this is the answer to your question. It's because nobody's arguing against the decisions of those other councils. It's because no one is trying to say that, oh, we should throw out the Council of Nicaea. If I went to my priest and I said, you know what, I'm not sure about the Council of Ephesus. Like, I don't know if I can believe that Mary is the mother of God. Well, okay, the first thing that's going to happen is he's going to look at me like I've lost my mind. And the second thing he's going to do is tell me that I need to spend some time and thought in prayer and that I need to correct myself. But nobody's doing that. What they are objecting to is the decisions made by Vatican II because they don't like them. Well, I'm sorry, there are always people who don't like the outcome of a council. There are always people who don't like what a papal encyclical has to say. And when that happens, you just wait for the next pope and see if he has better ideas.
And I would actually go a step further. It's been pointed out that almost every Catholic, seemingly in the West, denies some aspect of Vatican II. Now, Vatican II had to say about the sacrifice of the most young to Moloch.
Okay. I am just go. I am going to let Dan McClellan handle that one because he is a trained professional and I am not.
If your Bible says that people in and around ancient Israel worshipped a deity named Molech and sacrificed children to that deity, that's probably a mistranslation. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion. The fit for this video is Metallica and Justice for All, but especially for Jason Newsted. A growing view among scholars of ancient Israel and the Hebrew Bible is that no one ever worshipped a deity named Molech in the ancient world. About a century ago, we discovered a number of inscriptions that were associated with infant burials, and these inscriptions described these burials as sacrificial offerings, and they used the word Molech to describe the type of offering. And sometimes they also included the deity to which the offering was made, which was usually Baal. And so the word Molech probably originally just referred to a type of offering, and specifically a child sacrifice, although we do have indications that they could substitute an animal or money. And so this is probably what the Hebrew Bible is referring to. The word Molech probably identifies these offerings as a specific type of offering. But over time, that knowledge was lost, and probably around the time of the translation of the Septuagint, that word was reinterpreted as the name of a deity. And this was probably helpful because it then answered the question of who these Molech offerings are being made to. Because originally, they were probably being made to Adonai. Another common view among scholars is that Adonai required child sacrifice in the earliest periods of Israel's history. And we may have a remnant of that in Exodus 22:30, which seems to command child sacrifice, although later iterations of these laws in places like Exodus 13 and 34 add to it an expectation of redemption, but that is nowhere hinted at in the covenant code, the earliest legislation in all the Hebrew Bible. This is a growing view among scholars. If you would like to hear a full argument for this view, Heath Durrell's 2017 book, Child Sacrifice in Ancient Israel, is probably the best and most accessible discussion.
Thank you, Dan. But the point is that Anthony Stein is not saying that because he is concerned about pagan sacrifice. He is saying that because he wants to demonize abortion, and specifically, he wants everyone to focus on legal abortion versus
back to the pastoral disciplinary or non-definitive.
Or he wants to focus on things that make abortion, he wants to focus on law. He wants to focus on making abortion illegal rather than on enacting social policies that don't put people in a position where they look at their situation and decide that it would be better if this particular pregnancy was not carried to term. Because they may not have any, that may be the least worst option for their family at that moment. So arguably, creating a society in which abortion is never the least worst option should be the goal, rather than making it illegal. But that is a legitimate argument that Catholics can have once you agree, okay, we want to keep people from having abortions. How do we do that? But that can't happen if you are trying to paint the people who are arguing for the legality of abortion as demonic child murderers. He's making a bad faith argument. He's also talking about the sacrifice of the most young to Moloch as a way of getting around YouTube censorship. I'm not saying that people should go to his channel and report this video for that. I'm just saying that that's something that people might want to do.
It's been pointed out that almost every Catholic, seemingly in the West, denies some aspect of Vatican II. When we're debating people online, will say, I accept all the binding teachings of Vatican II, because there are none. Paul VI tried to walk it back a little later, but the cat was out of the bag at that point. And Mr. Gaspers goes on, also on X.
Keep in mind that by Anthony Stein's argument, Pope Leo could tomorrow wake up and say, anyone who does not accept everything in Vatican II fully is anathema and excommunicated, which would excommunicate him and the SSPX. Leo could also say, okay, anybody who doesn't accept this thing on ecumenicism is kicked out. He's not doing that. He is allowing people to have freedom of conscience and a variety of opinions as long as they are willing to work within the system. The SSPX is not willing to cooperate or work within the system. It's not hard to understand.
He says, at the very least, the Pope needs to specify which fundamental elements of the Church the SSPX allegedly refuses to accept, and which points of Vatican II they are required to accept that they currently don't.
And the SSPX has been repeatedly asked to come to the table and talk about their issues and get the clarity that they claim to want about Vatican II. That was the offer that was made in 1988. That was the offer that Pope Benedict made. That was the offer that Pope Francis made. And they are unwilling to do that for reasons best known to themselves. I strongly suspect that it's because when they do, they won't have any argument left.
In other words, what are the minimum requirements for full communion with the Catholic Church? According to the DDF statement of February 12th, that was their reaction and response to the SSPX announcement. Because Pope Leo said they reject fundamental elements and refuse to accept key points of Vatican II that are core to the Church, but he doesn't say what they are. So we only can go off of what the SSPX has said, and the SSPX has said for decades. More ambiguity.
The SSPX has said publicly what their problems are. Leo has said publicly that the SSPX needs to accept Vatican II. This does not strike me as ambiguity. This strikes me as everybody knowing exactly what is going on and then saying it.
It's one of the hallmarks of our crisis, by the way, is that as the guarantor of the faith, the papacy is not supposed to be issuing these bizarre statements that are ambiguous in nature. That's not to be supposed to how it's supposed to work. Now you'll find some interesting things that came out afterwards online to this. Nick Cavazos, if you're familiar with him, basically thinks that this is going to be the end of the traditionalist movement when the SSPX are excommunicated. That this is going to lead to, because he cites the Transalpine Redemptorists who are out now, who have been excommunicated because they became essentially sedevacantists. The Franciscans, the Immaculate, are being abolished, and bishops like Strickland are not getting their sees back. They're not becoming bishops again. That the FSSP and the Institute of Christ the King are tightly controlled. They cannot go to a new diocese without that bishop's permission, and many bishops, in full violation of what the
I am less confident that that will result in the end of the traditionalist movement. I agree that it may be the end of the traditionalist movement within the Catholic Church, but I think that that is because a lot of traditionalists are either going to follow the SSPX into schism, or they are going to decide to stay loyal to Pope Leo and to the Catholic Church. And I think that it is going to affect things, and it's really going to affect the state of play within the Catholic Church if people who are super unhappy and super traditional are going to have a place that they can go, particularly since the SSPX is going to insist that they are not excommunicated. Which is, of course, the way that the SSPX gets around the problem that they both have to have a pope and a Catholic Church in order to be legitimate. But at the same time, they also want to insist that the Catholic Church, as it currently exists, is not even remotely sacred or holy or worth paying attention to. So, and that's why I think that they may end up having an alternate conclave. But I agree, there's probably going to be a lot of traditional Catholics leaving. I am going to be keeping track to see which ones stay and which ones leave, because I think that'll be super interesting.
What the rights of the FSSP have kicked them out of their diocese, right? So again, collegiality. So he contends that this will be the end of the traditionalist movement. To which he gets pushed back from Jeff Kassman saying, as a historian, you should know better. Cavazos cites the old Catholics for this. He says, this is a replay of 1988, except the SSPX is now far larger, well established, and the crisis in the church is well known, especially among the young. And that is absolutely true. It's not a fringe movement such as the old Catholics, and there's obviously no schism, as I think all canonists agree. And again, canon lawyers have been having kind of a field day with this, because the Code of Canon Law says that if the person honestly believes that there is a crisis in the church, then like the consecrating bishops don't get excommunicated for it. If they truly believe there's a crisis in the church, and the SSPX truly believe that, it's in the Code of Canon Law. It's very clear. That's why we get to papal positivism. What is papal positivism? Sometimes called hyper.
Okay, so basically what he's saying is that the SSPX's interpretation of canon law trumps the Pope's interpretation of canon law. It's literally placing the opinion of online traditionalists like Anthony Stein above the decisions of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. I don't think I need to say how inherently ridiculous that idea is.
papalism or magisterial positivism. And now some set of economists disagree with what I'm about to tell you because they tend to take a more broad view of papal power. They will cite sometimes Archbishop Lefebvre and his statements before Vatican II. It's a complicated issue, but it's the view that papal authority is virtually unlimited and that whatever a reigning pope teaches, legislates or commands is ipso facto orthodox, binding and beyond serious critique, simply because the pope has said or done it. And the papal positivists think this because the Holy Spirit is supposed to guide the pope. Papal infallibility, all that stuff. It's worth noting papal infallibility hasn't been invoked since Pius XII, not in an official capacity. And he wasn't the first to do it. Pius IX, when it was defined, wasn't the first to do it. There are plenty of statements going back to antiquity of popes using the binding and loosing power of papal infallibility. It just hadn't been formally defined what it was. But papal positivism, this is the theory of contention here that you see in the post-conciliar church, treats the pope's personal will, or as they call it, his personal magisterium of Francis, we've heard, as the sole or supreme criterion of truth, detached from continuity with the scripture, tradition, and prior magisterium. Traditionalists like the SSPX, Father Ripperger, Dr. Kwasniewski argue that this is a modern distortion, that papal positivism reduces the pope to an absolute monarch who can arbitrarily change liturgy, discipline, or even doctrine, ignoring the limits of papal power. Leo has hinted at this himself. Remember when he said attitudes have to change about James Martin's stuff and other things?
Again, James Martin stuff is referring to the current position of the Catholic Church, which is that gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, just generally queer people are welcome in the Catholic Church and are to be treated with respect and love as individuals, and that really what the Catholic Church asks is that they try to refrain from genital sexual activity. He doesn't like that. It's Pride Month. Happy Pride. Hug your girlfriend or boyfriend or friend. That's okay.
We're using the synod on synodality to change attitudes. Papal positivism, according to the traditionalist view, contradicts the church's organic understanding of tradition. The Pope is the servant.
Okay, I am going to stop screen sharing because Jordan is here. Yay! Hello, Jordan.
Hello. How's it going?
I'm doing great. I've just spent an hour, well, actually, no, it's 5, so an hour and a half, yelling at extremely stupid Catholics with very poor reading skills, to the point that I think that it might be deliberate. So now I have been able to verify that everybody that is on the video we're going to watch is a Protestant.
Okay.
So now we can yell at stupid Protestants.
Sure.
Okay. So Jordan, would you care to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. My name is Jordan. I'm a nuclear engineer. In the past, I ran a YouTube channel called Reason to Doubt, which is still up. And if I ever get time to do hobbies again, I'll do more of that. But you can find me on the internet, usually on Fridays on Dapper Dino's Top Hats Off channel, where I play a character in his Star Trek TTRPG, which is a lot of fun. So
Yes.
that's hence the background.
Yes, and you are frequently a participant in the annual Cambrian Bunny Awards.
True. Yes, I'm also there as well. I'm a
you're
active,
there for the Cambrian Bunny.
Active participant in the Science Friends
Yes.
thing, though I don't do much visibly online all that much anymore.
Yes, but you answer all those important nuclear engineering questions that we
Sure.
all need to know, which is why I brought you here today, because I don't know enough about the carbon-14 stuff to explain why they're being dumb.
Sure.
So we've got Jordan here. So anyway, I guess We might as well just get into it.
Sure.
And we will talk about the Shroud of Turin.
Sounds good.
Yep. So let's go. Okay, I will switch to the video that we were on. I'll go into full screen, so let's see if that works. Okay, there we go.
Such that there are continually new discoveries because they didn't know everything. And so that's all I'm saying here is that we have to admit that we don't know everything scientifically. I have tried that, saying that, but rather the response is, this is a God of the gaps argument. Well, no, it's not. I'm not mentioning God. I'm not mentioning miracles or the supernatural or anything in this. I'm doing scientific analysis.
That's
and it's the person
completely
who's asking the
disingenuous.
question that's bringing up God. We should.
Yeah, yes, it's completely disingenuous. And it's also, I think, to me, kind of, this is the problem I have with people who insist on naturalistic explanations for miracles, is because ultimately, if you're arguing that something is a miracle, you're arguing that this is God, like, basically bending physics, right?
Mhm.
To like the ultimate extreme that we can't even understand, right? Which is at least a defensible position, right?
I mean, I think
Yeah.
if you're looking for evidence of it, I guess what he's trying to get at is he's saying, if we see physical evidence of something that cannot happen through any natural means, then it must therefore be supernatural, I think is what he's saying.
Yes.
It's hard
Well,
to say though, but so when he says I'm not talking about God or the supernatural, while he doesn't say those words, it's very clear what he's trying to convince you to believe in.
right. Well, and what he's trying to say is that if I can come up with irrefutable scientific proof for God by proving that this piece of 13th century religious art is actually a miracle, then you have to believe in my version of God because I have the math. And we all know that if you have the math, you win.
I mean, I'll be honest, if his hypothesis, which for anybody who hasn't seen his past stuff, just real quickly, what this guy whose name is Bob Rucker, he's a fellow nuclear engineer. He doesn't like to admit that I'm a nuclear engineer. He's gone to great lengths to try to say that I'm lying about that. But fellow nuclear engineer Bob Rucker believes that the Shroud of Turin, the error with the carbon dating, is due to Jesus engaging in extra-dimensional travel and his body therefore becoming, I don't know, disappearing. And there's a burst of neutrons as a result that only go up and down, and those neutrons turn nitrogen in the cloth into carbon-14. Presto changeo, you've got a carbon-14 date in the future. So if we did like a carbon-14, like a new test, or we did the Geiger counter thing we talked about last time or something, and it did in fact show that this cloth had more carbon-14 than like flax you'd cut down today. Like if you did radiocarbon dating, if it would date hundreds or thousands of years in the future, I'd have a very difficult time explaining that naturalistically. But
Yeah.
so fair enough.
Yeah, except that that's not what the carbon-14 tests came up with.
No. Now he asserts that if you were to do another test in the chest area of the cloth, then that is where you'd get these very fantastical dates. Conveniently, that's never been done and likely will never be done. But that is what he predicts.
Yes. And I assume that if he were to get the testing he says he wants in the chest area, that then it would be some other part that would
Sure.
be the magic area that needs to be tested.
I
Because
I think if we were able to do a test that definitively showed that the chest area was no more radioactive than any other cloth of the 13th century would be. My guess from my conversations with Bob is that he would probably abandon his existing hypothesis. But I do not think that he would then say, "Oh, well, I was wrong. This is just medieval art." Like, I don't think that would cross his mind. I think he would just go on to the next, available hypothesis.
Yes. Now, and it's important to keep in mind that on the basis of everything that the history of that studying the history of textiles can tell us, everything that art history can tell us, everything that studying the history of medieval religion can tell us, this is a 13th century piece of this is a 14th century piece of religious art.
Right.
So basically his thing would also, it's like, why not just throw time travel in there while you're at it, right? The Shroud of Turin was mystically imprinted in the year 100, or in the year 1, using cloth that was woven in the 14th century, and then was taken back in time and left in a church in France.
Right.
I mean, you can solve this entire problem with a single time machine.
And, if you are willing to go to the lengths that he is willing to go in terms of invoking miracles, then why stop there? Like,
yeah,
you could basically explain any evidence whatsoever if you're willing to, if you're just willing to invoke sufficient amounts of supernatural, meddling. I mean,
right.
the God that he believes in is the almighty creator of the universe. Literally nothing is beyond his power. So
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So it's like, at this point, like, you might as well be sitting on the bridge of a starship.
sure, why not? God
Yeah,
can do
it's
it.
like,
Yeah.
why not? You could be.
Yeah.
Hey, you could be the one who planted the Shroud of Turin for all we know, using using Starfleet technology. It's like, and yeah, we're getting kind of silly, but I think that that's because that's how absurd this argument is, right?
Yeah, and he wants to pretend that he's just a referee calling balls and strikes. He's just soberly applying the scientific method, but that is clearly and obviously not what he's doing. Like, he has got an answer. He decided, in fact, in some other interviews, not in this one, but in some other interviews, he has said that, like, he basically saw the radiocarbon dating, was like, well, that can't possibly be right because it's authentic, and then pursued different explanations. Like, he clearly has already decided ahead of time what the answer is.
Right. And it's also worth pointing out that, like, the only reason why there was widespread acceptance of the Shroud of Turin as the authentic shroud was because it belonged to the King of Italy. And it was in the political interest of the House of Savoy to be able to say, oh, look, we have this super important relic.
Mm-hmm.
It's like even the number of miracles produced by the Shroud of Turin are like infinitesimal, right? Like we're talking like old lady prayers. Like, the Shroud of Turin is putting up like old lady prayer circle numbers. Like,
I mean, and so we've talked a little bit about his bias. I think it's worth noting, like, I'm an atheist, you're Catholic,
yeah.
So the fact that we have very different worldviews but can come to the same conclusion, I think, says something. But also, just like, if I could pick a result, I would much prefer that this cloth was authentically Jesus burial cloth. That would be so cool. It would be so cool to have that. I would
yeah.
much prefer a world where we had that piece of history. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
But we don't.
Yeah. Well, and it's also like worth and the reason why, like, you know, I, as someone who like has like, you know, seriously like been have seen an authentic relic and have like, you know, done weird religious stuff in front of it, it offends me that someone is pushing a fake relic
Mhm.
because it destroys people's faith in relics, right? Because it causes everybody to go, this is garbage, you know? And yeah, it's just, it's not good for anybody,
Yep,
you know?
everyone loses.
Exactly.
Well,
Everybody
except
loses.
except for evangelical YouTubers, I guess. There's a lot of views. If you're gonna be pro Shroud, that's an easy way to
Oh
like
yeah.
jack up your numbers.
Well, and I think that that's actually the other reason why the Shroud of Turin has become so popular is because the Shroud of Turin is a safe relic for Protestants
Right.
because it's a relic of the resurrection. So therefore, extremely right-wing Catholics and extremely right-wing Protestants can be like, okay, as long as we're just talking about the Shroud of Turin and not like the, like, you know, pieces of Therese of Lisieux that are sitting in my parish church right now, like the Protestants don't have to think that it's weird
Hmm.
because, like, you know, pieces of bone from a nun who died, you know, a little over 100 years ago are weird, but the Shroud of Turin is cool.
So
And it's like,
that's certainly they certainly seem to think so.
yeah, exactly. So it, yeah, and I think that that's part of the reason why the Shroud of Turin becomes popular. And unfortunately, when you build your, you know, entire worldview on nonsense, you end up either realizing, oh, wait, everything I was taught was wrong, or
Yeah,
or you abandon the nonsense.
I think stuff like this, not nearly to the same extent as young Earth creationism, but anytime when you basically condition someone's belief on like you have to accept this thing as opposed to the scientific method or our understanding of history or like any other demonstrable thing, you inherently make that belief brittle because if the person takes any amount of time to look into it, that the magical belief is not going to hold up, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly. I mean, I've said more than once, I think that young Earth creationism, and we can add the, you know, the Shroud of Turin to that list, is something that has probably made more atheists than Richard Dawkins could ever have agreed could ever have like hoped to make in his entire life. You know, it's like because you teach people to base their faith on nonsense.
mm,
And then they go, guess what? It's nonsense.
yep.
Anyway, okay, so let's hit play because we're just both ranting, or at least I'm ranting.
Should wait for technology and science to explain it instead of throwing in your invisible sky daddy. How ridiculous. Well, no. But we have to take the evidence that we have and look for and allow for the evidence to indicate something that is outside of our current understanding of the laws of physics. For example, when Einstein hypothesized that there were gravity waves, that was way outside the.
Again, though, there is nothing about the Shroud of Turin that cries out for a non-naturalistic explanation.
True. And also I think like some people have a inaccurate understanding of the way new scientific like ideas come about, I think. When you look at like general relativity is one of my favorite examples of this. It is not the case when a new scientific theory comes to the forefront that we have taken the everything from about the old one and throw it away. It's that the necessarily the new theory and the old theory must make the same predictions where the old theory was right, you know? And so general relativity at low speeds, at low masses, is identical. I mean, not literally, but like very, very, very close to the predictions of Newtonian physics, to the extent that if you're going to the moon or Mars, Newtonian physics is fine. You don't need to know anything about relativity, you know? And so like, so it just science is the process of becoming successively less wrong, and so the whole the framework of general relativity didn't completely upend our understanding about the regions where where it was well understood. It just expanded that into regions that Newtonian physics failed in. His thing would get rid of all of it. Like everything that we think we understand, we just have to take that and completely throw it away, you know? And if you're going to ask me to do that, you need to have like killer evidence, you know? And he just doesn't, it just isn't there, you know?
Yeah. And more to the point, like, again, he's talking about a naturalistic explanation for an event that he believes happened once. Right? So by definition, it's not testable.
I'd
right?
say, well, you could, it's testable in the sense that you can repeat the tests, you know?
Yeah.
So he could test the implications of his hypothesis, which I've said every time I've talked about it, his hypothesis is falsifiable. You can falsify it by doing a carbon dating test on the Shroud and not detecting this crazy amount of carbon-14. So it is testable. It's not, but the fact that the thing happened once and only once really limits the limits what you can do to test it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that was kind of more what I was getting at. But because it's not like there are, you know, two incarnations of God who were both crucified and were both resurrected, and we now have two shrouds, and we can compare the verifiable shroud to the Jesus shroud and look for the similarities and differences.
We don't have it yet. Who knows?
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, like there was actually a young Earth creationist recently who was like, "Oh yeah, the odds of the resurrection were 1,000,000 to 1." By which argument, there are probably like 6 people who were resurrected running around the Phoenix metro area.
Right.
You know, it's like this is not how it works. This is not how anything works.
The range of people's normal understanding of the laws of physics. Yet gravity waves have now been proven to exist. So when Einstein proposed that, people didn't ridicule him for making a God of the gaps argument. No, of course not. They realized that he was just saying that this is something that is beyond our current understanding of the laws of physics. And that's all I'm saying. I'm not even claiming this is a miracle or supernatural, because I'm doing science. Now, if you start to ask questions related to those topics, I will say, okay, let me take my science hat off and put my Bible believer's hat on and answer your question. So I try and make a clear distinction what we're talking about. And sometimes people say, well, you're not even allowed to talk about God or something, or theology or biblical evidence, whatever. And my response is, why not? Who said that? You know, why is that true?
Right.
Are there evidence police out there? They're going to hunt me down and punish me for?
Which is it, Bob?
Yeah,
Do you want to talk about science or like which is it?
Yeah,
Pick a lane.
exactly. Because he just said, "Oh, I'm making a scientific argument." You can't say, "Oh, I'm making a scientific argument," and then say, "Well, but of course we have to take the biblical evidence into account," because at that point you're no longer arguing about science. You're arguing about like history, you're arguing about, which are also sciences, but they're not lab sciences.
Sure. One more thing on just the last that relativity thing really bugs me. One last thing about that. The one difference between what Einstein did and what Bob does is that Einstein said, "Hey, here's a body of observations. I'm going to here's my theoretical framework, and from that framework I can show it makes predictions that match the predictions we already have, and now it extends further and makes novel predictions. So we have good evidence that it's good in this region, and now I'm going to extend that into regions that we're then going to discover." But he's like, here's the theoretical framework from which you can understand this, and here's the predictions we can make based off of it. Bob has no theoretical framework whatsoever. Like, there's no reason why anything happens. The reason is God did it. The reason is, and because it's a supernatural thing based on a supernatural entity for which there are no restrictions. There could not possibly be any theoretical framework. So it's just two completely different things.
Right. He's trying to he wants it to be a supernatural event, but he wants it to be a supernatural event that he, as a nuclear engineer, who are obviously the smartest and most, handsome and charming people in the world, but an argument that he, being a nuclear engineer, can understand. He has figured out the math of the resurrection, which, okay, but my dude, the math is not mathing. Like, not even a little bit. And, and it's worth pointing out, in the Renaissance, that was part of the whole, heliocentric versus geocentric universe debate, was because until Copernicus figured out that the orbits are elliptical, the geocentrism had better predictive power. And then when you figure out, oh, it's an ellipse, all of a sudden the heliocentric model works better and can make better predictions. So that's exactly, that's how science works. Okay, so I'm going to hit play again. Or something.
Saying that? No, of course not. I'm allowed to talk about history of the Shroud of Turin. I should also be allowed to talk about the theology of the Shroud of Turin. I've studied it enough. I'm a qualified individual to talk about this. Secondly, are his studies peer-reviewed? Now, I'm often frustrated by this. A lot of people think that if a paper is peer-reviewed, then it's true. And if it's not peer-reviewed,
right,
then it's not true.
That's how I hear it largely described a lot of times.
Yeah, well, my goodness. I read one article that said that half of the papers that are published in peer-reviewed journals are basically wrong.
Huh.
Well, what happened to the peer review? Why didn't that assure that it was true? Well, and then think about the difficulty in getting an accurate peer review on a paper written for a general audience, which is what my papers are. They're written for the layman. They're not written for, mostly is the case, I've written them for the layman to be understood by the layman, so that I'm avoiding a lot of technical terminology and whatnot, so that they can appreciate the evidence for the Shroud of Turin and thus make it.
Okay, I'm sorry. There are many very fine scientists who publish in academic journals and also have a very good career as science communicators.
Mm-hmm.
And they will be the first person to tell you those are two different jobs.
For sure. Like, if I'm writing, I don't publish in academic journals, but if I'm writing something for the audience of people of the nuclear engineers, I'm going to speak very differently than the audience of the general population. But if I'm going to do science, then I need to do it in a rigorous way, complete with all the math and evidence thereof. Like, he is true. He is correct insofar as it goes that you can't publish in a peer-reviewed journal generally and have that be like for the general audience. But like those are two different things that you're trying to do, you know? And you're not doing science if you're just publishing blogs for the general populace. That's not science. For instance, like he's got this data. He ran it through NCMT. So far as I know, nobody has ever seen his data but him. He's done like a graph, you know. And granted, if you just told me the premise, I'd expect, okay, well, there's more body in the chest area, therefore you'd have more neutrons, whatever. Like, it's plausible, it kind of fits what I'd expect, but still, like, nobody can check his data, so nobody can possibly confirm that his results are actually what he says they are. That's just part of the scientific method, you know, is for other people to being able to repeat your experiment. And he doesn't do that ever.
Yeah. And as you've pointed out, there are non-invasive tests that could be done with a Geiger counter that would come up with data that would explain that at least would show, is there more radioactivity over the chest area?
Sure. We could falsify his entire hypothesis, or at least we could either falsify it or it could be shown to resist falsification with no destructive tests whatsoever. But like on the peer review thing, though, it is true that just because something is peer reviewed doesn't mean it's true. Peer reviewed papers are wrong. Sometimes you put out data and it's not correct, or and like other people try to repeat your experiment and they don't come to the same results, and that's all fine. But what peer review does do is it requires, or at least when it works well, it requires a minimum level of quality. You know, you have convinced other people, even if they don't agree with your results or your interpretation of your data, you've at least convinced them that your paper is logical and is worthy of consideration, you know?
Right. It's you have reached the level of seriousness that other people need to engage with your argument as a serious argument.
And before people jump in the comments and say, "Oh well, no one would like the bias against religion in peer-reviewed papers, like you couldn't publish something on the Shroud of Turin." There are peer-reviewed papers on the Shroud of Turin all over the place, like,
oh yeah,
all the time. Especially in papers that are like centered around Italy. That tends to be where most of the researchers are. But like there are peer-reviewed papers in peer-reviewed journals about the Shroud of Turin. I have personally read like several dozen of them, and I know there's a lot more. So yeah, he could do it if he wanted to. He just doesn't want to.
And there are, and it has to be said that like most of these peer-reviewed papers studying the Shroud of Turin, when they're being done by people who have not set out to prove that the Shroud of Turin is authentic, have come to the conclusion that this is a piece of 14th century religious art.
Well, I will say that I've seen references in peer-reviewed literature to radiation hypotheses. No one in peer-reviewed literature references his hypothesis specifically, because how could they? Because they don't have the data to do it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's worth pointing out at this point that even before it was possible to do any kind of C14 dating, people had pointed out that given the way that a body was typically prepared for burial at that time, you wouldn't have gotten that nice imprint, right? So even in the Renaissance, even in the early modern period, people were arguing, well, it must have been miraculously imprinted on the shroud, right? Like it was painted on by God, basically, right? So he also has the problem of, okay, well, how did the image get on the shroud in that way exactly when the resurrection happened?
I
you
mean,
know, yeah.
I believe. Well, he's going to talk about his image formation later.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well. Okay. Well, then I'll just hit play and
More
we'll keep
likely
going.
that we'll be allowed to do testing in the future by a groundswell of public opinion asking for future testing of the Shroud of Turin. But we should judge papers based upon the evidence, not based upon whether they've been peer reviewed or not. That's what I would say. And to get a good peer review on the Shroud of Turin, you have to have experts on the Shroud of Turin, which scientists are not. They're not familiar with it. So if I turn it into a peer-reviewed journal, I get peer-reviewed by people that are not familiar with the Shroud of Turin. And what good is that? And, and people who 90 to 95% case for scientists make an assumption of naturalism so that they automatically approach the Shroud with the wrong philosophy.
So here's the thing.
Except that he is also, yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So like,
okay. Oh, I was just going to say, except that he's also doing it from the point of view of naturalism, because he's insisting that there is a naturalistic explanation that he can determine using his powers as a nuclear engineer.
He wants to kind of have his cake and eat it too. But like, here's the thing about his objection. Like, scientists aren't an expert in the Shroud of Turin. Okay, but you could have scientists that are experts in nuclear physics, and they could judge the nuclear physics part of your paper, right? Like, you could get, like, and you could have a peer review team that can judge that stuff and make sure you're doing your stuff correctly, but you don't want to because you don't want anyone to check your work. Like, they don't need to come to this if they would need to accept your evidence, right? Because he keeps talking about all the evidence he has. If you just took your evidence, here is what the data show, and made a paper, and it didn't mention any, he says he's not talking about the supernatural. He says he's not talking about God. So if he just published a paper that's like, here's the evidence, making no claims as to what the source of this neutron was, there's no reason that wouldn't pass peer review if the rest of his stuff was up to quality.
And it's also worth pointing out that young Earth creationists have actually succeeded in getting papers in favor of young Earth creationism published in scientific journals, largely by like picking like the journal of my I'm going to mispronounce something. Like basically like this the actual practical use of microscopes.
Microscopy, maybe.
I'm sorry, it's a word that I've only ever seen written, so I have trouble remembering how to pronounce it. But the point is like the way that they were using the microscope was correct. And that was mostly what was being reviewed. It's like, hey, you can use your microscope like this to do that. And they've gotten published because their method was sound.
Yeah, it's true. And like, again, it's not like there aren't a long history of in fact, emphatically, the Shroud is not 14th century. It is a miracle from God papers that have passed peer review and been published. So like the idea that this is a thing that cannot happen is just false. And he knows it's false. He's talked to the people who publish these papers. I have been in a conversation with him and several people who have published papers on the Shroud of Turin. He knows that this is a lie. I don't know why he's furthering it, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, it's easier to believe that the truth is being suppressed by the evil atheist cabal,
right,
that runs the world and is, secretly in league with the Freemasons, and everything else. Sure. So how are you so do you have fun at the secret atheist cabal meetings?
I think I'm too busy to attend the secret atheist cabal meetings.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that I've heard that there's a lot of schnapps. And now we can have a headline. Jordan admits the existence of secret atheist cabal.
Judge the papers based on the evidence that you see in them. Let's see what other interesting questions. How can a burial cloth last 2,000 years? This is linen. This is highly resistant to attack by insects.
Okay. I just want to say that the idea that that linen could survive that long, like that's a red herring. That's a side issue. Like everybody knows that in hot, dry environments, linen preserves extraordinarily well.
Yeah.
And the thing is that we actually have pieces of Egyptian linen that are like way older than the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, there's no problem with linen surviving thousands of years given the right conditions.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is that the Egyptian linen that, based on the date of the tomb, then they radiocarbon date it, and guess what? The date of the tomb and the date of the linen usually coincide, given a margin of error and given the fact that, people would reuse fabric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a shirt in my closet my mother made for me over 50 years ago. It looks just as good as it did 50 years ago when she made it. There's no problem in cloth lasting almost forever if it's kept dry, away from insects, for cotton, for example, and away from fire. The only other things that would decompose fabric would be oxidation, a normal chemical reaction, and dehydration, removal of the water. And those are very slow processes. Plenty of linen examples go back 4,000 years rather than just 2,000 years. So there's no problem. The next one, I'm surprised there hasn't been another carbon test to prove the Shroud's age after 20 years rather than just.
So
go ahead.
It's just kind of funny that he talks about for the Shroud to last this long, it would just have to be kept, dry. It would have to be kept away from these other things. You'd have to keep it away from fire. Famously, the Shroud has been kept away from none of those things. It's just,
yeah.
I don't know. I don't have a problem believing the Shroud is 700. Obviously, it can last for hundreds of years. Clearly,
yeah, exactly.
It's a red herring, but it is funny that he just specifically described all of the things we know for a fact the Shroud was exposed to.
Yeah. Well, and also I was able to find an account of the way that the Shroud was being taken care of in at least the early 20th century. And it literally involved, after the Shroud had been kept on display before it was carefully put away, it was being brushed with a perfectly normal clothes brush to remove any dirt and debris and things like that might be adhering to it. Which it seems to me is the kind of thing that could lead to contamination, which could possibly explain the anomalous C14 results.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how much contamination you would need, but if all you're trying to explain is shifting a couple decades, then it wouldn't take much contamination at all.
Right.
Depending on when the contamination was introduced and what kind it was.
Yeah.
If you're trying to shift it from the 14th century to the first, you're going to need a lot. But from 1320 to 1330, that's not much at all.
Yeah. And the thing is that we know that the Shroud of Turin was sewn onto a different piece of linen as a conservation method. And we know that was done in the 18th century. So it would probably, this is even to some degree an experiment that could be replicated.
Sure.
All we would need would be two pieces of really old linen and a piece of new linen and a piece of old linen, put them in contact with each other and see if it messes up the date. In theory.
Yeah. I mean, I think like those kind of things are reasonable explanations to like that kind of thing could easily explain the difference in dates between the different labs.
Yeah.
But like they can't explain, you can't invoke that to go from the 14th to the 1st century, which is what Bob needs.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm pointing out, is that even the anomalies in the data can be explained by things that we know happened
Sure.
to the Shroud.
Totally. Like Oxford used, I can't remember the name of the chemical, but there's a particular chemical that Oxford used in their cleaning procedures that it is especially good at cleaning fats and things like that off of cloth, like grease or candle wax and stuff like that. And the other two labs did not use it. And so like that alone by itself could be definitely sufficient to explain the difference. That's all.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have the other known sources of contamination. Anomalous data is not the thing. I also have to say, it's sort of funny he brought up fire, because the Shroud of Turin was in a fire.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
And in fact, there's some people who actually have tried to argue that the current Shroud that we have is a copy. And that the real Shroud is out there somewhere, waiting to be discovered, probably in the basement of the Vatican, along with the menorah from the temple.
Right.
Whining about the old test, scared to test it? Well, the owner of the Shroud now, since 1983, officially is whoever the Pope is. He gets the final say. And the last time they did scientific testing on the Shroud, the authorities in the Vatican were burned by it. The science did not keep their promises as to what they were going to do and how they were going to act in the post-processing. And
it was a PR nightmare.
It was a PR nightmare, yes.
Yeah.
And so the question is, why should they test it? They believe that it's true, basically. And so why bring any doubt upon it?
No, they don't, though.
Yeah, exactly. And that was something that I wanted to bring up, is that the current position of the Vatican on relics that like cannot be like verified, right, is that people are allowed to venerate them. They're allowed to be like, yeah, I'm really into the Shroud of Turin because I look at it and it makes me feel a certain kind of way. But you are not required to believe in the authenticity of any particular relic. And in fact, the Shroud of Turin is one of the kinds of relics that in the 20th and 21st century, the Catholic Church actively tries to kind of just like, we'll just kind of move that one away because it's dumb, right? It's like, we don't want people to believe something that is demonstrably nonsense. And it's really just this crowd of Shroud enthusiasts that are trying to do it. The Catholic Church, I think, would be perfectly happy if the Shroud of Turin went away.
I can't speak authoritatively, but it wouldn't surprise me if that were true.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't speak authoritatively either, but what I can say is that the Shroud of Turin book was published by a church-going Catholic who works at the University of Turin, and everybody who endorsed it on the back of the book is a Catholic. Most of them were Catholic priests, and they were like, yes, this book is great. We love this book. And the Vatican didn't say that people shouldn't read the book. They didn't like this guy didn't get dragged in front of his bishop and asked, why did you write that book? You should sit, because the Vatican theoretically has the power to tell people to sit down and shut up. The fact that they let this ride means they probably don't have a problem with people not believing in the shroud. That's all I know. Anyway, I'm going to hit play.
They need to do further testing is an explanation for the carbon dating that is understandable, is scientifically based, and has confirmatory evidence for it. And that's what my explanation for the carbon dating of the shroud is and will be after we do further testing of other things. For example, there is a neutron emission by the body to shift the carbon date on the cloth. Those neutrons would also cause changes in the limestone, specifically calcium 40 in the limestone would absorb a neutron changing to calcium 41, which has half-life, as it's called, in the hundreds of thousands of years. So would still be present. So that should be testable if we can get a good sample. Also, cloth that was exposed to the neutron.
Is he talking about taking samples from the alleged tomb of Jesus and looking for radiation in the limestone?
I guess. I think that's what he's saying. So basically, the idea is that this flood of neutrons, not all of them would have been absorbed by the cloth. In fact, most of them would not be. And so they would bounce around the walls, and some of those neutrons would be absorbed by the calcium in the limestone.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's true as far as it goes. It is true that if this were to happen, you would have evidence of all kinds of unusual isotopes via neutron absorption.
Yeah. Which brings up the question of why hasn't he, since there are a few candidates for the traditional site of the tomb, why he hasn't gone to Israel with the Geiger counter.
Well, so I don't know. There's a couple things I don't know. I don't know what's the natural abundance of these isotopes. So like calcium 41, is that a naturally occurring isotope? I actually don't know. And like if it is naturally occurring, what's the variance? Is it like uranium, where there's like a very, very small variance in the isotopic prevalence between like U-235 and U-238? It's basically the same everywhere. But is that the case for calcium 40 and calcium 41 in limestone? I have no idea. Yeah. And so I could certainly imagine situations where like the variance is wide enough that you wouldn't be able to tell if it was just because of variance or because of irradiation. But the point still remains that if he were so inclined, he could use actually MCMP, the same thing, the same software he's already allegedly used to make his fancy graphs. He could use that to predict what the prevalence would be given the isotopic, given the type of limestone that he's looking at. So that would be a way to test his prediction without having access to the Shroud of Turin. I guess at least it would test whether a particular hole was exposed to a neutron radiation burst, which, yeah.
Which again, would only prove that his particular scientific model of the resurrection was incorrect.
But like, I'm sure what would happen if he were to actually do that is he would get out there and he would wave his Geiger counter around or take a sample and send it to a lab to get a whatever, or like whatever method he chose to use, and it would come back normal. And you'd say, oh, well, this isn't the burial place of Jesus. That would be his conclusion. and that would
Yeah.
be it. It wouldn't actually do anything for his hypothesis.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that that's something that Shroud of Turin fans have struggled with for a long time, is because there are other churches that have what they claim to be like pieces of the shroud.
Mm-hmm.
Like not the whole shroud, but chunks of it, right? And the thing is that some of these chunks of fabric have been like, we have verifiable provenance that goes back to say like the 8th century, right? Now, I'm not saying that those pieces are actually the shroud, right? But what I am saying is that when you have a piece of linen that is a piece of linen that looks like it could have been woven in the 1st century, that you have a better candidate than the Shroud of Turin. So you have to understand why the chunk of linen that's sitting in a church in Spain is less likely to be authentic than the one in Turin.
So, since you mentioned other pieces of linen, I don't remember in this video if he's going to talk about it, but he talks about it a lot elsewhere. And since I have to go in 13 minutes to put my son to bed, I'll bring it up now. So, one of the other cloths that is often talked about in the same conversations by Shroud of Turin proponents is the Sudarium of Oviedo.
Yeah.
Which is, they say, the face cloth of Jesus. So basically, Jesus' face had this cloth put on it during the process of burying, and then it was discarded when he was like wrapped with the shroud. And they point to like a bunch of stuff, like it's like a Rorschach test of like stains on this thing, and they like claim that they match the shape of the face on the Shroud of Turin, whatever. I can't see it, but okay. Regardless, the thing about the Caesarium of Oviedo is it has also been carbon dated, and it carbon dates to like the 8th century. So like, well, that's a problem because these two things allegedly came from the same source. And so Bob says, oh, don't worry, I have a solution for that. See, the Sudarium was thrown to the side, and I put that in my magical MCMP model, and wouldn't you know it, that with the irradiation it would have gotten, with the shroud being what it is, it would have accelerated it from the 1st century to the 8th, and no further or less. What amazing, right? And so he actually claims that that is another data point. The thing that people don't challenge him on, because like the people he talks to, this gentleman here, they're not nuclear engineers. None of the people he talks to he actually goes out of his way to avoid talking to people who have any idea what he's talking about. Part of the reason he hates me so much. Because as soon as he said that, the first time I heard it, I challenged him on it, and I was like, but that's not actually confirmatory evidence, because he, in his NCMP model, basically told the model where this cloth is in the... He also has a tomb geometry that he's made up, that because we don't actually know what Jesus' tomb is, if he ever had one. So like that's also made up, but whatever, set that aside. He has decided in his model where in that tomb this cloth is. And so he put it in a spot and it got the result he wants. But if it wasn't the result he wanted, he can just move that cloth anywhere in the tomb to get any result he wants. Right? Like if he claims that he put it where he thought it would reasonably be discarded, and the first time he did it, it got the result that matched. And maybe that's true. I don't know, but like either way.
Also, it's worth pointing out that a Sudarium would not have been discarded, because when the body was wrapped for burial, there would be various pieces of cloth, one of which would go over the face, like when the person was positioned in the tomb.
Right.
So it's like, again, it's like, with young earth creationism, you have to get rid of all branches of science, right? With the Shroud of Turin, it's it's the same pseudoscience problem.
But the thing about the Sudarium is that, like, just like he talks about, like, only some vanishingly small percentage of the neutrons would have been emitted that are in the body. Why that percentage? Because it gives him the answer he wants. Like, why are they vertically up and down? Well, because it gives him the answer he wants. Why was Suicidium thrown at that particular spot in the tomb? Simple, because it gave him the answer he wants. If he wanted a different answer, he could move it in the corner, or move it on top of Jesus' face, or put it anywhere and get the answer he wants. So it is not. It is meaningless as evidence because the value could plausibly be literally anything. So
Yeah, it's the power of this is the answer I want. Okay, I'm gonna hit play. We've got about 5 minutes left. Do you want me to hit play so we can get one last point? Okay.
Burst in the shroud, and that would in the tomb, that would include both the shroud and the sudarium. That's the face cloth of the shroud. Sudarium of Oviedo would have experienced this neutron absorption in the elements and the isotopes in the cloth. And so that if we could get a sample from the Shroud of Turin, or more likely from the Sudarium of Oviedo, we would then test for chlorine 36 to chlorine 35 ratio. And so that if we can get some of this confirmatory evidence, that it would go a long way in promoting a willingness to do carbon dating of the shroud. Another good idea is to simply take the shroud as we have it and lay a series of film radiation detectors across the shroud. And after a year, then take those and measure them for radiation release. Because some of these items that would have been formed on the shroud should still be radioactive. So there's multiple different ideas there. Next,
that's basically
I don't
my
think
idea.
that it's Jesus because many other people were crucified.
Yes, and the thing is that if he were allowed to do those tests and it didn't give him the answer he wanted, all he was going to do is come up with an alternative explanation.
Right, because there's no theoretical limitations. Like, it's not like he's working within some kind of rigorous framework where, like, going back to general relativity before, like, Einstein had a developed theoretical framework, and if he got a result that was completely outside of that framework, it would just falsify the whole thing.
Right.
But, like, Bob doesn't have that. Bob has no limitations. His answer could be anything he wants. So like, I'll just tell you the answer. One answer you could have. Suppose that he did the film, right? And it didn't come with the curve that he expects where you have like this peak of radiation in the middle. Well, one of the assumptions he makes in his hypothesis is that basically the body released radiation proportional to its mass. Whatever, I forget the number, some small number of the deuterium in the body fissioned and spit out. Why just deuterium? Don't worry about it. Don't ask those kind of questions. So like spit a neutron and a proton out, right? And he just kind of assumes that is even throughout the body, which I mean, that's what I would assume as a first approximation. Sure, yeah. Too, sure. But like, if he doesn't get the answer he wants, oh, well, too easy. It turns out, wouldn't you know it, that the ones in the chest just didn't fission as much, and it was mostly the ones in the feet. And what proportion? Well, amazing. Glad you asked. It is exactly the proportion we saw. Weird, like.
Yeah. But what happens if he gets consistent radiation readings along the full cloth?
Well, that could just be, turns out that whatever mysterious, definitely totally not supernatural guy's thing that did it had some kind of relationship where the less mass in the area, or the more mass in the area, the less the deuterium fission there. And so the net effect of that would be an even radiation curve across the whole thing.
Oh, of course.
Now, why that? No reason, just because. Like, there's like, if I can just make up answers too,
Yeah. Yeah, because ultimately he's looking for just that little sliver of plausibility,
right?
In order to make it work.
I've spoken to Bob a couple times and many more times in the comments. I don't know if he did the film or my Geiger counter or something, some experiment that convinced him that his current model was definitively wrong. I don't know whether or not that would cause him to abandon it. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But the point is not even whether or not it would. The point is that you using exactly the same level of rigor and rationality, he can explain anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because ultimately he doesn't want to believe that he's taking things on faith. He wants to believe that everything that he believes and everything that he is arguing for is completely rational because feelings are bad.
So I'm an atheist. Obviously, I don't believe
Yes.
I don't believe supernatural things exist personally.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I, at least if someone is going to come to me and say, I think this is supernatural, I don't have evidence for it, but I believe it because I believe this other thing. Like maybe I have a personal testimony of the direct evidence of God, and therefore I now come to this with the belief in supernatural, so I can believe all these other stuff. Okay, I can disagree. We can talk about whether or not that's a good reason to believe something, but at least you're being consistent.
Right.
You know?
At least you're starting out with like you and that's really what it comes down to is that as long as people are basing their position in facts, right? Are saying, okay, these are my a priori assumptions about the way the world works, and I'm just going to proceed from there. That's fine. It's when people believe weird things that aren't true that you run into problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know. Anyway, so there's the timer. So real quick before you go, next week you will be having fun in Iceland.
True. Yes.
Which seems lovely. And I'm extremely envious because it was actually, let me check what the temperature is right now. I think it's, let's see. Yeah, it is 103 degrees freedom right now. I assume that is a smaller but even more horrific number in Celsius.
Mm.
So you'll be having fun in Iceland next week. Next week, I will be continuing to talk about the SSPX while you're not here. And then the week after, are we still on to work on this video more?
Yes, I believe we are.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we will talk about the Shroud of Turin more in a couple weeks, and Jordan will be having fun in Iceland, probably at the secret international atheist cabal meeting.
Right. I just want you to believe I'm in Iceland.
Well, no, that isn't that where the secret international atheist cabal is based, is Iceland.
I don't, that might be a good place for it. I think Iceland's fairly secular. So
Yeah. No, there is no secret international atheist cabal that runs everything, really.
Link. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So anyway, goodbye and good night, and we'll see everybody later.